is the assessment of standing posture. Perhaps from a different perspective, you've seen it before. The central focus of this is the concept from Daniel David Palmer of tension in the neuroskeleton affecting the oscillation of nerves, the expression of consciousness, and the production of health. With this, I've identified 5 tension patterns of that neuroskeleton, each of them called the phases. As I'm looking at the structure of the spine, I'm looking to see from the central core of the spine, is there a pulling going this way or that way, a flexion, extension pulling, a lateral bending pulling, or a hybrid of them in what areas? Posture itself is a spatial orientation of your inner and your outer world. What's going on in the inner world and the outer world meet as your posture. As the spine shifts, and as there's a shift in the internal experience and the adaptability in the outside, it meets as the structure of posture. So posture is the essential way to know about what the dynamics of an individual is from where they are at a starting point and as they're changing. And naturally, as with everything in our assessments, we're looking to see what is the person's interior experience and how does that match to the exterior you're looking at. So we're going to start assessing a postural assessment and evaluation. If you have a grid line or use posturography, computerized assessment, that's phenomenal. I'm going to be looking at just the general concepts that will apply regardless of the amount of detail you use to get more discernment. So as we're looking at posture here, we're looking to see, is one shoulder higher than the other shoulder? Is one more anterior than the other? Does there appear to be a pulling in certain areas this way or pulling this way in the musculature in the way they're holding themselves? The spinal contour, the curve. In this situation here, what's happening is there is a relatively natural curve in the upper cervical spine. In this middle cervical spine, what's happening is the curve is exaggerated a bit, and then the lower cervical spine, the upper dorsal here, this area is actually more posteriorly. So this is showing me posturally, just as a general clue, that this disturbance in the flexion extension patterns. What's important to know is that generally when there's extension or flexion challenge in the upper cervicals, at the occiput it shows up at sacrum. At C1 it shows up at L5, C2, L4, C5, L1. So very often we'll see a parallel distortion in flexion, extension, lateral bending at the top and at the bottom of the spine. Everything is connected. And during the postural assessment, this is the way we get to see what type of general structural holding elements are involved. Now, with the model of Alf Brigg's model of adverse mechanical cord tension actually states that the actual postural shift between the occiput and the lower spine creates the maximum amount of pulling or tension, either flexion extension or lateral bending. So we're looking to see, is there alteration in the head carriage? Is there a position, where's the person's pelvis relative to a midline? These are very important aspects to look at. The masculine spine will have less of a lumbar curve. The feminine spine will have more of a lumbar curve. These are all important factors because as an individual starts expressing themselves in a more integral nature, the spinal curves will shift because their inner experience of the body and the outer start becoming masters one. So as we look at the spine, I'm looking here, now turn around this way if we can. So we see here that there is an angle in this direction, this plane forward in this part of the spine here. I'm aware of that. Now on the table that may not show up because on the table he may tend to have his neck in extension, and if his neck is in extension more while on the table, I might not notice this while lying prone. So this is actually going to also help me be aware of how might I be advising him as to lie on the table, or actually do a cervical leg check, turn the head from side to side, to make sure there's a full engagement here where it can engage all the way down to the lower spine. We're going to take a look here at the pelvic girdle. And at the pelvic girdle here, where is the pelvis in space? So as I observe here, I'm observing here, and there's a increase in the lumbar curve over here, and there tends to be a flattening in this area. Well, this suggests to me here is that there may be actually pulling the spinal cord all the way up. And the spinal cord moves 2 to 3 inches in the neural canal between the extremes of flexion and extension. We will see a dynamic of that on the table, but looking at him right now, I'm looking at this and saying, this area is pronounced in extension over here. There's a curve here, it's flattened here. If the spinal cord is being pulled upward, and the spinal cord ends in this area, and the cordoid quantity actually in pilum terminale attaches down here, this is suggesting to me that there may be a pulling upward in the spinal cord. That is playing out in the flexion extension type distortion we're seeing here. If I saw more of a lateral bending distortion here or here, and a global response, it's also telling me the entire neural skeleton is moved towards that way, flexion extension and lateral bending. And this is important because every contact NSA will be taken to address flexion extension or lateral bending and a self-regulation of that. And where does the center of gravity or the weight-bearing stress go through? When looking at here, it appears to hit this part of the spine. We're going to turn this way here. It's hitting this part of the spine over here. If we go further down, he's missing most of the spine, and actually gets to part of the basis of S2, S3 here, actually misses the sacral base if you actually start just eyeballing, so to speak, the weight-bearing stress. Instead, if his spine was further back like this and neck was like that, then the weight of the spine will go more effectively down the spine, and it would actually hit more the sacral base, which is really meant to have the weight-bearing stress. And where the weight-bearing stress it goes to the spine will also let you know the areas that will be the burden of the stress in the body, the area that will actually sustain energy, where energy will be compressed, where there will be an area where there's energy accumulation where it needs to be redistributed to another spot. Be aware that there is a difference between standing and sitting posture beyond the mechanics of it. Because mechanics generally follows energy, it follows consciousness, it follows the internal and the external dynamic that occurs in an individual. And when a person is seated, they do not have the same type of stress on the postural receptors as there are standing. And this is important because when you're standing, a person actually is able to express many other defense strategies or needs to express more defense strategies than sometimes seated. When the person is seated, their weight is going through the pelvic girdle we're looking for and through the femurs and the acetabulum. When standing, there's more of a load on the system and it tends to accelerate towards more of a defense strategy. Although very often someone seated may have pain or may have a challenge because the weight-bearing stress is really being compressed between the ischium, between the femurs and the lumbar spine. So there's more of a force being taken in that position where it's being dissipated over a wider area, standing. The seated posture is generally the posture we observe people with visit to visit. So we're going to start with the perspective is what is going on with this neuroskeleton? What is going on with the central core being stretched in flexion extension and lateral bending? Are there areas that tend to move this way or that way? We're going to take a look at, is a person appear comfortable in their body? It's interesting. Are they comfortable in their body? Do they seem to be defensive? The posture is a spatial representation of the internal or interior experience as it relates to the way you experience the outer world. And within that conflict, or within that harmony, shows up posture. Now, please be aware that for some people, the posture is an essential aspect to create a change. If this individual organizes the world through structure first, then this person's posture will make a very big difference in their behavior and the perception. If someone organized the world by experiencing a sensation first and posture later, it may take a little bit of a time before we see a shift in the posture on an individual session. So it's important to understand that there may be a lag time to see a shift in the posture based upon the person's own way that they reorganize the world. Irrespective of this, posture is an essential assessment tool in a person's progress, the progression, the level of care, and to know where they're at that moment in time. So looking here at the posture, we're looking for the high shoulder or the low shoulder. We're looking for where is the weight head carriage. So seated here, the neck is a little bit more extension than he was standing. There's a compressive effect of the table pushing up. That actually can cause a different structural element because different weight-bearing elements are involved. And a lot of the effect that will be going to the legs and the pelvis straight up to the body are being neutralized by the legs seated. So again, it shifts what's happening here. So turn facing this way. So we're looking here, there is an extension of the neck. There is a bulging posteriorly here in the upper thoracic spine. This part of the spine is flat. There's an anterior curve in this area. And actually, when I look at the anterior curve here, and turn yourself around this way, please. The anterior curve here is rather pronounced here. And some of the reason why this may be a little different than stand, the weight-bearing stress and the weight is stopping at the ischium, the femurs, and the sacrum, and it's pushing it this way where it'll be dissipated through the tension of the leg standing and other parts of the body more effectively. So we're becoming aware of this, and I just want you to watch this. If I just take the chin, I tuck it, and I bring the head back like that, without doing anything else, just as he's seated, there's going to be a shift in some of the weight-bearing stress. If I tilt the neck this way, just to show you here, and down, there's a change in spinal tension patterns. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not. It's all connected. That's the thing to remember. It's all connected. And we want to see as a baseline for dynamics. We're going to look and see either the scapula, posterior more or the other. Does there appear to be a connective tissue of fascial pulling to one side or to the other side of the body? If you look at the spine as a system, which we're not used to looking at, we're used to looking at shoulders or vertebral levels or the skull or the hip, as a whole structure, what does it appear to be doing? Does it appear to be having a tendency to pull forward, to pull back to a side here or to a side there?